Hey, what up, Team Tim? Happy Friday afternoon. As you can see, I'm not in my normal background again because, yeah, I still have a broken back, right? And what's that dad joke? Hey, how long have you had a week back? Oh, about a week back. So today we're bringing a really, really boring, exciting conversation about cyber insurance. We've got some really great experts here joining us today. But as usual, Team Tim exists to help MSPs level up and shift left and get y'all educated along the way. Mr. Tim, say hello to everybody.
Hey guys, Tim Schnur, the other Tim, a Team Tim here. Really excited about the episode today. We've done, I think we like to revisit the cyber insurance topic every other month. So we found two of, I think, some of the great contributors. If you don't follow them on LinkedIn, follow Joe, follow Andy here. But really excited about it. Myself, I think we hear it every week. Used to be a consultant in the Big Four. Now I work in the channel at a vendor called Cabela, which does data discovery. Not something I think you'll find on an insurance application just yet, but it's something you might want to check out. But Jesse.
Hey everyone, Jesse Miller with Power PSA Consulting. So obviously, if you don't know, I help MSPs build and scale cyber programs by tactically deploying ops systems that act as force multipliers for their business. Happy to be here, and yeah, there we are.
There we are.
And yeah, super excited to hear about the topics today, and yeah, I think we'll have some great discussion around it.
And awesome. And so everybody's aware the other Tim is driving today, so he's probably going to do a much better job than I have, because I've been watching some of Jesse's rebroadcasts where he's kind of been like slicing and dicing. So hopefully he's better on the shtick than I am. But without further ado, I'm going to start with Andy, because A goes before Jay. So Andy, say hello, quick 30 seconds. How are you, my friend?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you guys for having me on. Andy Runyan with Brightline Insurance and Brightline Dealer Advisors. And, real quick, just started in insurance about half a decade ago. Really started off planning on medical professional liability was the plan to start, but got in with a group that was real big on cyber named Acrisure. And this little thing called COVID happened. So if you can imagine, the medical professional wasn't real great in the moment, and cyber, took off. So I spent the last 4 years really digging in and specializing in cyber. And man, excited to get going today. Thank you guys for having me.
Awesome. Nice. Thanks for that little intro. And I think we're going to move on to is it Joseph? Joe? What do you prefer?
Depends on who's yelling at me at the time. Actually.
Yeah. Right. So, all right. So tell me, MSL, is that like Major Sports League? What is that? MSL?
No. So I have a master's in cybersecurity law from the Carey School of Law, and then got my bachelor's from the Naval Academy in robotics. Used to be called systems engineering, but then that kind of was such a vague term. So it's robotics now. Former IT before that. What else have I done? You guys see me on Reddit. I'm Joe_cyber. You've probably seen me speaking at Kaseya, ConnectWise, and the 20 and Spice World. Went to go speak at Spice World, not affiliated with the Spice Girls. I was very disappointed.
Very disappointed.
Yeah, I was like, why do the Spice Girls care about cyber insurance? Yeah, author of the best-selling book in the nation on the topic of cyber insurance and cybersecurity law. Nice. Been doing this for like 8 years long, just kind of toiled away long before it was cool. I just really liked it, thought it was interesting. So help a lot of MSPs all around the country do cyber insurance for all types of industries. And you could probably tell I'm just a giant nerd. So if you look behind me, you'll see, there's Lego DeLorean. If anybody's interested, I got like a sweet Terminator cup, some Lego Star Wars helmets and stuff like that.
Nice. So you said Spice World, right? So, little anecdotal here, right? When we first got into NIST 853, and we started to write control implementation statements for it way back in '07, maybe, yeah. I actually wrote into the implementation statements, we use Spiceworks for our ticketing system. So, I mean, as we matured and as we grew and we brought in better and safer, secure tools, but not too long ago, I found an old implementation statement that hadn't been updated in a while, and it still referenced Spiceworks. So, yeah, we've been a huge lover of that. But now we've graduated, right? Now we use real tools. Not that Spiceworks isn't a real tool, but yeah, we've kind of graduated and grown up a little bit. So
yeah, back your way out of that one. It's all good.
I did. I still have the Spiceworks badges. In fact, one of my favorite pint glasses is from Spiceworks, and it says "Keeping it spicy." I should take a picture and post that at some point. But yeah, anyways, enough on the whole spice work and Spice Girls and spicy sauce stuff. Let's get into something really hot and spicy: cyber insurance.
Yeah, there's a lot of topics here. Maybe we'll start with Joe. One of the things I mentioned as we posted this session was, MSPs, right, and their role, attaining or helping on readiness or filling on applications. You can go where you want with that, but you've put out some great videos on YouTube talking about am I okay? Is this something I should do? Filling out an application on behalf of a for an insurance policy of a small and medium sized business. So
yes, kind of the highlights from that video. I was listening to Andy, we were all kind of chatting before this went down, right? So the odds that the insurance guy knows what he's doing, right, that you find an Andy in the world are almost zero. Let's be real here.
Slim to none. Yes.
Yeah. We are not the brightest bulbs in the financial services box on average, right? And I think Andy and I can both laugh about that because we've probably
100%.
Worked with some people that make you wonder. So, generally you can't rely on the insurance guy in most instances, right? You say MDR, he's going to have no idea what you're talking about. The end user, if you let the client fill out those applications with the preface that parts of the application, right, we're not talking about it. I'm talking about the technical control side of it, right? If you either A, just get on the phone with them, right, or B, refuse to fill it out, I think the odds that they screw that up are astronomical, right? We all know what the end user does, and it's not pretty. So at least the way I look at it is I go, okay, well, there's going to be liability associated with this, no matter which path you're going to pick as an MSP, right? They get a cyber claim denied, they're coming for you. Doesn't really matter which path you chose in the beginning. So at least I am a fan of saying, hey, what puts the most control into the hands of the person that has the best answers, being the MSP. Now, if you're going to play that game, I always say I don't gamble because I don't know the rules of the game. So if you're going to play the game, you have to know the rules of the game, right? So I'm saying, hey, MSP, if you're going to fill out the technical portion, one, use that as an opportunity to talk about additional controls for your client, right? And everything else that's going on in the world. But two, you need to be talking about, hey, what are the changes coming to cyber insurance? We could probably talk about that moving forward, that someone should get ready for.
I want to come back on that. Yeah.
And then three, you have to understand, I think MSPs are getting more adept at this, that there are certain questions you can't answer. There are certain questions that just don't make sense, right? Are you HIPAA compliant, right? What does that mean?
Is that a thing? It's not a thing.
I guess it's a thing to insurance companies, right? But it's, you get a question like that and you go, all right, how do you answer that? And I think probably the biggest takeaway, there's kind of multiple avenues we can go down. But I think the biggest takeaway for MSPs is to go, hey, I can always add an addendum to this application, right? So maybe it's not 100% yes or 100% no. It's a 50-50, a 90-10, a 99-1, or we have some functional equivalent to whatever that control they're asking about is. If that's the case, put the onus back on the underwriter, right? You just explain it in a brief paragraph. You have to remember it's not a CISP sitting on the underwriting desk at an insurance company, right? So you got to kind of break it down, Barney.
Got to run that sucker through Chat GPT and say, rewrite this in third grade reading level.
Yeah. Or
I think that's a great. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, or as we say in the military, right? Just break it down Barney style, right? Which is just something that a non-technical person should be able to understand, right? So that way, what are you legally doing? You're being completely forthright with your answer. You're not trying to hide anything, but you're also not going to screw yourself.
Yeah.
So I do have a kind of a risk question about MSPs filling out insurance forms on behalf of their customer, right? And so, I mean, I'm going to fill that out as much as I can, but now
I'm going to add on to that. MSPs, VCSOs, MSSPs, a lot of we have them listening in as well. Like, I'm assuming it's the same, but keep going. Yep.
Yeah. So when we look at us technology professionals, how do you like that, Tim? Are us TSPs, technology security professionals, whatever acronym we want to throw out there, right? If we're filling this out on behalf of our customer, saying we either do or don't do stuff, then how much risk are we assuming as the MSP when boom happens?
Yeah, I think that there's no way, just due to the services you guys are rendering, right? I think that there's no way to get away from that potential liability, right? It's going to exist there in one fashion or another, right? So if an MSP just fills it out incorrectly, obviously that could be the basis of a claim, right? If that answer was material to the cyber event that occurred. That being said, I think, okay, you only have three options. You could ignore it, let the end user fill it out. They're going to screw it up. Then much higher likelihood, I believe, of a claim being denied. Two, you could answer it over the phone. How many people have tried to troubleshoot with an end user over the phone? Right? I think we all can chuckle at the complete insanity that has occurred before we're like, all right, I'll be there. So I'm like, all right, well, I think the odds that they misinterpret what you're saying are way too high. And then it turns into, well, he said, she said, right? And from a liability perspective, I think Andy would agree, not big fan of that. Whereas I think understanding the liability is going to be there regardless. It's, if we give the MSP the most control, there's still going to be a liability, but I think the potential that something goes wrong is, I mean, exponentially lower, or at least orders of magnitude lower. And with that, I mean, how much liability do you have? Well, if a claim gets denied and it turns out that the MSP was filling that out and didn't tell the truth, there's a lot more to, it's not just, you know, we get into material misrepresentations and various legal standards and like, did they answer it in good faith? But that kind of, I don't want to go down the legal rabbit hole here, but
well, let's talk about why claims get denied. I mean, like, why do claims get denied, right? A lot of times claims get denied because the coverage wasn't there in the first place and the buyer didn't know it wasn't there. That's the most common reason, right?
Right.
Second most common reason is the fact that the limits weren't appropriate, right? So we kind of get into this deal where, and I mean, this is a conversation we have constantly. It's like, why I'm worried about the attestation. It's a binary yes, no, and we got the addendum, and like, guys, listen, I'm at least from my experience, that's not where the rubber hits the road 90% of the time. Where the rubber hits the road 90% of the time was, I bought a cyber policy because my agent didn't know what he was doing, and it didn't have funds transfer fraud coverage on it. And I wired 65 grand to somebody, and I went to make a claim, and it was denied because the coverage wasn't there in the first place. Or we bought that coverage, we purchased that coverage, but we didn't quantify that loss potential up front. And we only bought 10K when we were wiring 65 to 80 grand every single week or month or whatever. And then the claim doesn't get denied, but it only gets paid in part. I think, I mean, Joe, to your point, I think all that's great, right? here's an example. Here's a real life example. We had a manufacturer. They were looking at their app. They were attesting, right? Said they backed up monthly. They said that they didn't verify off-channel on wire transfer, and they said that they didn't have MFA. Right? That's what they said. So
How'd that turn out for him?
Yeah, well, I mean, horrible, right? Like crazy high premiums. But I called the MSP because I know the MSP, like they work with us, right? And I said, y'all don't have MFA and you're backing them up monthly? Like, what the hell's going on here, right? And they were like, we back them up 3 times a day, and they do have MFA on. They just don't have it all over the place. To your point, there needs to be a 3-way conversation between agent, client, MSP, and everybody to a degree has a little bit of skin in the game. But at the end of the day, when that app's sent in, guess whose signature is on it? It's the client's signature, right? They're the one that's attesting, hey, everything on here is as I say, and here's my wet signature.
Yeah, I think that's perfect advice. I mean, so many people need to think about it that way, as it's a collaborative effort. And I think when we get busy and we're like, oh, I'm not getting paid, quote unquote, to fill out this insurance app, it can be an afterthought as an MSP, I'm saying. And so you kind of ignore it and hope for the best. But
Tim, did you catch that thing with the stream? Sorry.
I did. For some reason, it didn't post it to TEAMTIM, so I dropped a link over there at TEAMTIM. So if you're listening on Jesse or Power PSA or Tim, like one of us has this streaming someplace, and if it's not, it's on our YouTube channel. I checked YouTube. So food for thought. Since I'm the process guy, make sure we have a process in place so that we're actually streaming where we're supposed to be streaming.
Hey, Joseph.
What did I do?
I have a question for you, and this has come up with a couple of my clients, and so it's a burning question that I had that I wanted to ask you, and specifically what you're talking about. Hey, where do we draw the line in terms of protecting ourselves legally because we are dipping our toe in the water or taking on liability by helping our clients fill this out? What are your thoughts on, I think best practice for MSPs these days is to have an MSA and then do addendums, right, for scopes of work and monthly. What are your thoughts, and how much protection do you really get out of using a small project addendum scope of work with a really strong no warranties clause in it?
All right. So we have to think, let me start big and start kind of narrowing it down.
Put that MSL hat on, right? You got that degree, my friend.
And pretty good hair for being almost 40. So yeah, I'm still rocking it. It's just a matter of time. So we have to start by saying big picture, and we have to go one, because I know there's plenty of MSPs that don't even have contracts yet. Right. You are about to step on a landmine if you don't have a contract. And these are things that I will tell you, the number of bad contracts that I've seen. Now, I'm not here reviewing contracts. I'm not a contract law guy. That stuff bores me to tears, but I know enough about it to be dangerous. And the number of bad contracts I've seen from MSPs who just go to their local business attorney. What does their local business attorney do? He uses the same software I have, which is Westlaw. Maybe he has LexisNexis. Downloads the template, changes a couple names, charges them $1,000 for it, out the door. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. There are like 4 or 5 attorneys in this space. The liability it's shifting so quickly, right? And there's so many technical details that have to be within an MSA, SLA, SOW, etc. Mm-hmm. The local business attorney, I've never seen a good one, ever. Like, no exceptions. I've never seen a good one from the attorney down the street. Now, that being said, you also can't just borrow a contract from your buddy, right? I see that all the time on Reddit, and I'm always like, don't do this. Why? Because
I see that everywhere. Go to template.
Yeah. Right. So let's say, looking at the legal system, different states have different rules, right? So if you look at the venue of dispute within your contract, if you're like, hey, we're an MSP in Florida. I had an MSP in Florida send me their MSA, right? And I just looked it up, and they had obviously borrowed that from somebody in Arizona, because the venue of dispute was Arizona. And I'm like, hey, man, are you going to Arizona? You're going to be flying out there to settle a lawsuit? And it's like, no, you don't want to do that. So you have to know what your venue of dispute is. Different states have different rules, right? So if we start talking about, and it could be published rules, it could be kind of just common practice where we go, hey, you know what? The limitation of liability in this jurisdiction of your venue of dispute, the attorney who's licensed there would go, well, you know, it's probably about 6 months worth of fees, right? That's what the courts seem to go with. Whereas a different state could go 1 month, right? Yeah. Or I've seen MSPs, they ask me, what if I just say nothing, right? My limitation of liability is nothing. I'm like, well, that's against public policy. You're not gonna be able to do that.
So what I think I'm hearing is to mitigate some of the risk as the MSP, obviously we want to start with our own agreements and our own, this is the minimal viable thing that we're doing and everything else does not matter. So we bring in Joe Cyber, we bring in probably the half a dozen IT lawyers that exist in the US, maybe less than a handful of them that really know our space, and say, write our stuff correctly for our stuff. Stop using templates. Something near to me, obviously, and set our business up right from the start. And then when we're getting these cyber insurance forms, we're better positioned to say yes, no, and then the addendums accordingly.
Flip it back to the professional liability side of the MSP, right? And I mean, this is boots on the ground, what I've heard from one of my tech E&O carriers, right? I tell people all the time, if you want to know the value of the control, right, whatever the control is, whether it's an MSA, whether it's MFA, EDR, whatever, see how it moves premium, right? See how it gains you access to the market, right? I've got a tech E&O provider that they're like, yeah, MFA is good. They're going to fill out an app, but I want to see the MSA first. I want to see the contract first. And we're going to read the contract. And if we like the contract, then we'll go to the app, right? Then we'll look and see what they're doing. So, I mean, if you think about it, if an end user, if a client has a claim, right, where's that going to fall for the MSP? That's going to fall on their tech E&O or their professional liability. And we have professional liability tech E&O carriers that are saying the most important thing is the MSA. We will not go anywhere beyond that.
Yeah, and we have to, and I'll preface this by saying, you know, if I go back in the case law like 4 years, 5 years at this point, there really weren't any MSP claims. Like, it just wasn't a thing. And so part of this is, I understand we're kind of like, hey, MSPs, here's a fire hose, start drinking, right? But we have to start thinking, I hate this word, but I'll use it because I don't know any better words because I was not an English major, holistically about risk within an MSP, right? So MSPs, like, I get it, right? Constantly harping on defense in depth, right? One control is not enough. You got to get the control right, but just a firewall is not going to save you, right? So what we're talking about here is but a portion of that risk, right? And the total defense in depth. So I have a free video on my YouTube channel. It's called Get Smart Defense in Depth Through MSP, something like that, where we have to start saying, all right, how do we set up the MSP before any of this occurs? Right. So I guess what? Left of boom.
Where we are. Shift left, baby.
Right. So we have to start thinking left, and we have to go, okay, what can the MSP do? There are common practices in other white collar professions to start mitigating and transferring this risk away from the MSP.
They can start with proper policies, procedures, and documentation that has been fully governed and pushed out to the end client for acceptance and signature, just saying. But yes, building that defensibility for yourself and then your clients is what we talk about here a lot. Is how do you build the defensibility? Well, you have, as Andy said, a solid MSA that's been built by Cyber Joe over here, and then implemented with Jesse, Tim, and myself.
Somebody
Yeah,
somebody that knows the industry, not
baby.
your college drinking buddy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's
Jesse can go on this a little bit, but like you said 5 years ago, which is interesting, right? Because like pandemic happened, and if you look at the average MSP, like they're all about network security. And then you look at like common frameworks like CIS, and it's like network security doesn't even show up in terms of like the first 7 prioritized controls. And Jesse's working with these IT providers trying to get them on the right track, right? And then like last year though, we're looking at cyber insurance applications, and it seems like they're just kind of like playing down, right? Like they're not given, they're like, if we put this on the application, the MSP is not even going to understand it. It seems like some of the questions they were asking were just like very kind of like basic. And it sounds like, Joe, it sounds like they're getting, and Andy, you said this, like they're getting into pages and pages of depth and like, it's not, you have to have half a security brain, at least in terms of modern security practices, to understand kind of like what they're asking for, right? Like you said, whitelisting and PAM and, least trust. We won't use that word, zero trust, right? Like all these things, right? Like data access controls and all these new things that probably, I mean, Joe, I don't know how much time Tim and I spend a lot of time, Jesse spends a lot of time looking at MSP websites, right? Like they're either not updated or they're still offering that same thing like from 5 or 6 years ago. So
yeah, and to Andy's point there, right? Like we're talking about kind of just the application proper. And I'm going to tie in Heath's question here, right? When we're talking about potential subrogation claims. So
wait, what's for the people in the back? What's subrogation? I know how to say it. I know what it is. For the people in the back.
Yeah, so this is something I put in one of my videos a while ago. So subrogation would be, just to give you an example to illustrate the point, right? Client has cyber insurance, client gets hit, cyber insurance pays out. Now their cyber insurer goes, hey, we think the MSP was at least partially or fully culpable in that event. So now we're going to take the rights of our insured, being the MSP client, right? We had to spend all this money as the insurance company. We're going to sue his tech E&O policy, assuming he has one and assuming he has the right one, to try and recoup that money. Now,
here's a quick example for the techies out there. Let's say you go into a command line and you need to run a command as another user, and you say run as. It's a run as for legal, right? So that's it.
That's it.
Yeah. So this is something I spoke about a while ago in one of my videos, maybe a year or two ago by this point. But could you get what's called a waiver of subrogation from your client, right? Just because you have it in the contract doesn't mean it exists. To get a waiver of subrogation, the client has to go to their insurance company, request it, and then probably the insurance company could charge them more money because they're accepting more risk, right? As a factor of that. Now, could you do that? I mean, you could put it in your MSA, and let's say the client doesn't do it because they never read the contracts, right? Well, then now you have a whole different issue on your hand of you can't contractually obligate your insurance company to do anything, right? Outside of what's in just the 4 corners of that contract. So that would be a litigated issue and would probably get pretty messy. Now, is it theoretically a really good idea? Yeah. I mean, if you could get away with it, I don't see why you wouldn't want to as an MSP. I'm not sure how excited a cyber insurer would be to do that. But you could certainly ask for it.
In terms of litigation, right? So Andy talking about losses, right? And war stories here. How often, I'm assuming it doesn't get to litigation that often, does it? I mean,
that's what makes headlines, and it's what keeps everybody up at night. But
they're not really talking about like mechanic shop and whatever.
Yeah, we're talking about the Targets and the Equifaxes of the world ended up in court more often than not, right? And here's the shift, and you mentioned this, right? So 5 years ago, kind of pre-COVID, right? And now, what's the shift? The big shift has been pre-COVID cybercrime. These claims were kind of earmarked for Fortune 1000 and above, right? Post-COVID, now we've shifted down to single location, 400,000 in revenue, funeral homes getting ransomed, right? So it's shifted down, right? Underwriting, what's changed? you've seen 4 questions. Are you in the marijuana industry? Have you had a loss in the last couple of years? What's your revenue? What's your employees? Here's your quote. You've seen that graduate, and we mentioned this, into what is your, or do you have EDR, and what is it? What type of EDR, right? And much more sophisticated questions. So yes, things can end up in court. Yes, they do. But really the bigger question for the small to medium sized business is, how do I get the appropriate coverage at the limits that I need, that has every line item in there, that doesn't have exclusion, that doesn't have sublimits, and I'm paying a fair price. We ran some stuff today. We ran benchmarking for $100 million manufacturer that wanted $3 million in terms. The benchmarking bottom was 19 grand and the top was like 70 grand. So like there's a $50,000 difference in the bottom of the market and the top of the market. What do I do as a small to medium sized business owner to make sure that I'm not overpaying by an entire person's salary, right, on my cyber insurance?
And also, Andy, I think we labeled this podcast like, how much insurance do I need?
Sure.
It seems like everyone kind of gets like $1 million or $5 million, like some round number policy,
right.
but all businesses are different sizes, and
Sure.
all of them different liabilities, right? Like it seems like, how do you guys size things?
Right.
Like,
so
it seems like an art, but yeah.
No, it's not. And I mean, go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
So all right. My MSP does a lot of work with government agencies, state agencies, and foundations, and blah, 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 blah. And what we've actually been seeing when we sign a new contract with them to do work with them, they're actually coming to us with language in the contract that says you need these minimum, specifically on cyber insurance. Not like it used to be years ago. It used to be like, do you have insurance to protect your building that will never travel? And now they're coming to us and they're like, you need $5 million specific, and we want to see the policy.
Right. And to that point, honestly, like I mean, and I hope nobody from the state of Indiana is listening today, but like they don't know what they're doing. I mean, we had a client that was demanded $600K in cyber and $5 million in tech E&O, right, or professional. And they come to me and they've got this 5 and 5 quote, $5 million for cyber and $5 million for tech E&O, and they're like, well, how do I get $600,000 and $5 million? I'm like, that doesn't exist in the market, right? Like that's a unicorn, right? Like we can get you a brown stallion horse with a PVC pipe on his head, but we can't get you that, right? So I mean, everybody's just kind of stabbing in the dark at this thing, and the best thing is go back and look at claims data. This is a new line of insurance. We don't have 400 years of fire insurance to benchmark it against, right? So their carriers offer most of them have ransomware calculators or cyber loss calculators, and you need to understand there are 3 main types of claims, right? You've got your first party ransomware business interruption, right, which is kind of quantified in its own way, right, and that's tied to revenue and days down and how quick we can get back up. You have your third party. I've got to notify, I have to pay for credit monitoring services, I'm going to get sucked into lawsuits. That's going to deal with like what type of information and how much of that information do you hold and how do you protect it, right? And then you have the cyber crime, theft of funds, and that's tied to how are we wiring money and how much money are we wiring. So really the quantification piece has to be tiered out into those 3 conversations, and they're 3 very different conversations.
Gotcha.
So
the crime, really play in that second bucket. Keep going, Tim. Yeah.
The crime bucket that you just mentioned and wiring, is that implying that the insurance company would potentially pay the ransomee some money, right? Because we talked about this at like ad nauseum in the industry, like never pay a ransomware thing.
Right.
That's what you're talking about?
Yeah. So actually 2 different things. So cybercrime is the man in the middle deal, right? So you have
like
third party
invoicing fraud.
Yeah, you have a third party.
Manipulation.
Let's say you're a real estate developer and you have somebody come in and do a $300K. This happened to Barbara Corcoran on Shark Tank, right? She had somebody come in, renovate a penthouse, couple days before it was supposed to be done, they send her a $300,000 invoice. They say, hey, we're done 48 hours ahead of schedule. Her assistant, wires $300K to poof. That's the cyber crime portion, right? What you're talking about is ransom payment. Another, that's a first party coverage. And yes, there are, and what kind of sucks in cyber insurance, excuse the language right now, is there's no universal language or universal form. What can be titled ransomware with somebody else can be titled something completely and totally different with another carrier, right? And
cyber extortion or something.
Cyber extortion. Thank you. I was drawing a blank there, but yeah, cyber extortion. And that, I mean, yes, they, and as the agents, and I'm sure Joe would agree with me on this, we take a very agnostic approach of like, we're not going to tell you to pay it or not to pay it. What my advice is we want you to work with your MSP on your left of boom controls to put yourself in a position where you can say no, right? Like that's what we want, right? But every scenario is unique. So you better understand at your revenue and in your sector. And the reason I say revenue, like we got the Conti playbook, the public got the Conti playbook a couple years ago, right? Yeah. Conti was telling their guys, get in. Second thing you do is do a revenue search, right? Know how much you can ask for and what you can get. I had a buddy that, I mean, if you can't tell
They're
by the
sizing it better than the insurance companies are.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, if you can't tell by the accent, I'm a Southerner. I had a guy that was in the rural South. That's a buddy of mine that ran a $40 million a year manufacturer. And we did a deal with CISA, and we said, hey, you know, the average ransom payment today in 2021 is $250K. And he kind of grabs me after the deal and goes, hey, you mean to tell me that in little old small town X state that they're going to hit me for $250K? And I said, what's your revenue? He goes, we did about 40 mil last year. And I said, yeah, they're not going to hit you for $250K. And he goes, yeah, that's what I thought. And I said, yeah, it'll probably be closer to 2 to 3 million. Wow. You know, and he was like, so yeah, anyway, but the ransomware, insurance companies will refund for a ransom payment. And what they also will do is they will set you up with a negotiator, right? Like you may be talking to somebody that speaks Mandarin Chinese, right? Or Russian or whatever. Like they have folks that speak that language. They'll negotiate the ransom down. And I saw a stat the other day that says that it's not uncommon if you have insurance and somebody to negotiate on your behalf that you can negotiate that ransom payment down anywhere from 10 to 60%.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, I worked a really large Conti incident where they didn't have cyber insurance, believe that or not, and obviously didn't pay the ransom, but it was not pretty. So I'm well familiar with that actor.
Yeah, I've got a whole video. It's called something to the effect of why you will happily pay the ransom. Right. So I've dealt with, I hate to say it, like hundreds of cyber events by this point.
Yeah.
And I'm going to dig into that, right? You said you've done hundreds. Andy, you've insured hundred, like million, whatever, right? So let's dig into that a little bit, right? So from a technical perspective, and hypothetical, it didn't actually happen to me. It's happened to someone other, whatever. Yeah, you know, asking for a friend. An end user's account clicked a phishing link, passed credentials. Those credentials were captured, and then their account was taken over, i.e., business compromise email, right? As we would define it, how would the insurance define it now that it's BEC? And then number two, how would the lawyers deal with that whole situation, and you know, depending on the level of the breach and, you know, all that stuff. So the first question to Andy, like, what is that? Is that ransomware? Is that cyber crime? Is that crime somewhere? Like, what is that? We call it BEC, but
right. Is it social engineering? Right. And that's where, you know, all I can say in general is that every carrier has their own language, their own sublimits, and their own form, right? And that's where, you know, guys like Joe and I show up in the market. And I can't tell you that this scenario means this 100% of the time, because there's variance across every carrier and how they write their form, right? So dealing with, if you have a concern about that type of business interruption or that type of loss for your organization, dealing with a cyber specialist on the insurance side, and I mean, I know it sounds like we're flying our own flag, and we are to a degree, right? Your work comp policy, your business auto, your home and auto, probably fine with your college drinking buddy, right? Specialized risk needs specialized agents. The question that you're asking is why it is necessary to deal with a cyber specialist, because they can open up a conversation between the carrier. Hey, we're worried about X. How do you define this type of loss? Where would that fall under, right? Is there a sublimit to that? Are there exclusions that apply? Anything like that? I mean, there's the war exclusion has been a massive topic since the onset of Russia-Ukraine, right? So how does the form speak directly to this type of loss, and how does it quantify or not necessarily quantify, where does it, kind of place that type of loss within the coverage? And it does vary from carrier to carrier.
And I think that we have to, if I shift this back to the potential MSP liability, right? So, we often talk about, what are kind of the 4 buckets of coverage in a cyber policy. Also, the cyber coverage is on a techie, for an MSP, right? You have data breach / cyber event. A BEC would fall into that. Ransomware, loss of funds, miscellaneous, but situationally important. So when we talk about, and I see our clients doing this as well, right? My clients on the cyber insurance side, MSP's clients, they go, it was just a business email compromise. It was just a ransomware event, right? It's easy to kind of segment it, but we have to think as far as the MSP liability goes. All right, well, what if it was a business email compromise? Guy gets in, starts forwarding malware to the clients of the MSP's client, right? Or what if he got in there and now we go back forensically and we go, okay, he was digging through the inbox. There's a bunch of PII, PHI, or PCI in there, right? Or trade secrets or things that are contractually supposed to be carried. So we have to think one of the things I want MSPs to understand is, as far as your liability goes as an MSP, right? Just because a client says it was a BEC doesn't mean it's just a business email compromise, right?
That was going to be my next point. And where in this chain do we report or do we not report? Or what do we report? And what timeframes do we report? And who and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I know of an instance where this has happened recently, and DFAR and all that stuff, right? So yeah, what are they like? What's that reporting stuff look like, or do we even have to?
Yeah, so kind of I guess I'll say blanket statement. I have a video called "How Far Can You Go After a Client's Cyber Event" or something to that effect, right? But the gist of it is, a dentist and a neurosurgeon are both doctors, but you probably don't want one doing the other guy's job. So clients look at MSPs and they go, IT person, computer guy, they know everything about every computer and cell phone and piece of software ever made, right? Which I think generally lends credence to how well MSPs are trying to help their clients. That being said, there's only so far that an MSP should go, right? So now we have to start thinking about, all right, what was in that MSA, right? How far can you go to help these guys before you potentially start voiding your own insurance policy, right? Or you're going to get called to the stand and asked what what specialized software or what credentials you had as a forensics expert. So MSPs need to start thinking about particularly something called exculpatory agreements, right? Which are liability waivers. So let's say client gets a BEC, right? And the MSP sits down and they go, yeah, we can go back, change all the rules, etc. But we don't know that this wasn't a data breach. We don't know necessarily they didn't exfiltrate data, right? Because we're not forensics guys. That's not what we're looking at. Dentist and a neurosurgeon comes back into play. So the MSP can go, all right, well, is this something where I need to tell the client, hey, one, I would say, generally speaking, the MSP should probably be going, hey, we're not specialists. This is what we've done. This is how far we go. Past this point, you probably need to get cyber insurance involved, right? To run maybe a full forensic suite, right? Depending upon, and I'm talking about the average MSP that doesn't have like the full suite of tools. Even then, probably the statement still stands that, hey, maybe you should get your cyber insurer involved. There could be something here that is outside of our wheelhouse, outside of the services that we offer within our contract. The client could always tell the MSP, dude, pound sand, this was a basic business email compromise. I'm not going to spend 10 grand, spin up the cyber insurer to get in forensics and do all this stuff. Well, now you need to start thinking about, hey, do you have a liability waiver for your MSP, right? Where you sit down and effectively, once again, don't borrow your buddies. There's very specific rules based on the state, right? Where you go, hey, we told you this could be a bad idea, right? We'll do it, but you're not going to hold us liable by just changing the rules if it turns out that down the line, this was a much bigger deal and you just didn't want to spend 10 grand, right?
It
so
sounds like, it sounds like the MSP should be like basically best efforts. It's like, how much money is the MSP really making, right? Like Jesse knows the stat. You said it at a conference, like what percentage make money? So like how they said pound sand, they're trying to like, squeeze juice out of a rock, right? Like how much money are they really going to get out of an average MSP? It's like, I feel like it's like some guy passes out on the sidewalk, he's not breathing. It's like, well, I can get sued and break his ribs by trying to do CPR or something like that, right? But at the same time, like you got to do something. You gotta help them out.
That's interesting because that it is state law here in Minnesota that if you start CPR, you are not legally allowed to stop until you're exhausted or you physically can't continue, or you're liable if the person dies. Right. So you have to.
I ain't touching that. Like,
right. So
it's a similar line, right?
Yeah. It's a similar type of scenario that you got to consider, right? They could say you cause more damage by starting and stopping, and all those things come into play. Now, I will say, back to that Conti incident I mentioned, we did make about $200K in incident response and recovery services. So that was pretty lucrative. It was worth the effort at that time for ourselves. But yeah, you don't want to, I'd say for 5-10, K, you make sure you do it, but you actually make sure you have a very clear waiver of liability and exculpatory clause, like Joseph talked about.
Yeah. And it's super important too. I mean, when you think about, I mentioned malpractice earlier, in my career, cyber policies have that retro date, right? And that's why, listen, I mean, my stance is buy cyber right now when nothing's wrong, right? Because if you start seeing some stuff on your network and maybe you had a couple phishing attempts and it's like, well, nothing's happened yet, so I'm going to go buy cyber, right? And then we bind a policy on 9/1, right? And then we have a claim on 12/1, but then they go back and they find out that, man, there was some funky stuff going on for 6 months prior to us binding that policy. Guess what? I mean, and that's, I mean, there are some other things to consider when you look at binding a cyber insurance policy when it's, when regarding the retro date and activity on the network.
Andy, you bring up a good point on the retro part, right? Because, I mean, what's the stat? Like the average virus, I hate to use the term, I'll dumb it down. The average potential breach point sits in a client's network for what, 240 some odd days, I think is the stat.
It was like 6 to 8 months is what I've always said.
Yeah. And so like, okay, like in your scenario, like the thing's been sitting there. Maybe we knew, maybe we didn't know, maybe we weren't hunting because all we were doing was fixing printers and trying to get them to do 2FA, damn it. And it was there. Like, how does that play in? Like, that's a whole nother world, right?
Sure.
Yeah, it legally starts getting very complicated, right? Because now we have to start thinking about, was there a reasonable expectation that somebody knew this? What's the knowledge date? What's the retro date? Some policies I've seen have what's called a PMP date, that there could be some other potential legal issues that flow in, et cetera, et cetera. So, when it comes to, we should distinguish, right? That the MSP should have a tech E&O policy. Their client should have a cyber policy, almost without exception. Make sure that's in your MSA, that they have to do that. That's one of the greatest risk transference mechanisms you could have in place, because not only does it allow the MSP to go, hey, you should go talk to your cyber insurer. And I know you have one, it's in your contract, right? But if later a suit comes against an MSP, we have to think of this broad brush and go, what legal protections does the MSP have? Like in statute, almost zero. Right. If you look at, I started the insurance world dealing with financial services firms. Much more boring conferences, I'll tell you that much. But like take the accounting firm, right? The accounting firm has in statute protections for their industry. They have a state society that lobbies the state government for all those rules. They have a national society and now an international society that's running the show. So as a quick example, business owner sues the accounting firm and they go, hey, you were doing my business tax return. You didn't discover fraud, right? Well, AICPA, right? Professional standards say the accountant is not responsible for that. It's a separate engagement so long as you had this particular clause within your engagement letter.
Yep.
MSPs don't have any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
We talked about SROs, right, Tim?
SROs.
Like AICPA, right? Like CompTIA,
Yeah.
right? Somebody to step up, or someone to kind of like, you know, the accountants are smart about it. How do the IT? How's the average MSP get smart about it?
I think that's
kind of
partly because of the maturity of the
That
MSP
industry.
space, right? Like
Yeah.
we've just been doing it wrong for so long. Like we started like
because
like Joe said, well, because we could, right? Like,
yeah,
I started fixing my mom's computer, and before I knew it, I was fixing everybody in the neighborhood's computer, and then I was charging them money, and we digressed and progressed from, oh, now I can just put them on this monthly thing and make reoccurring it. Like, we've just been doing it wrong from the start all along, right?
Tim, but it's changing so rapidly, though, right? Like it's, you know, accounting's not changing rapidly. I'll tell you that.
No,
but there are tried and true risk transference mechanisms. Like my video called Get Smart, Defense in Depth. I'll put it in chat if anyone's interested. I am not smart enough to think up of this stuff myself, right? These are things that your white collar peers have been doing for 30 years. So like they work, right? So step one is, you know, hey, if we're looking at defense in depth, it's all this risk management, risk transfer and stuff, right?
Exactly.
If you get to court and you're an MSP, you are screwed. I have a case right now where the judge doesn't know how to use email. All right.
Right.
And I have an MSP in court, and he literally has his clerks print out every email. He writes on it with a pen. They go back and they type it up. Right. You are not going to win.
And that's the problem with the industry, right? So right now, MSPs are facing their biggest threat ever. And that's because they're assuming all the risk. Right. They don't know how to, number one, identify that risk. And then number two, how to appropriately and legally transfer that risk to put that risk back on the client where it belongs.
Right. And look at Heath's question there. Heath asked about should the MSP ask to be named as an additional insured. My answer to that is no. Right. But here's where you can get better, and here's where I see MSPs, you know, we talk about the maturation of how we do business, right? If you are a sizable MSP, right, and I know like we've got a client that I deal with in the South, and it's a regional client. They do about 40 mil in revenue. They are currently right now looking at hiring an additional staff member, right, putting somebody on staff, and their job would be like cyber liability risk management, going to every single client. Hey, send us a copy of your policy, send us a certificate, right? We're going to create a spreadsheet that says this client has coverage with this carrier and this amount. And then we're going to go at 90 days out, and we're going to have a full conversation, or maybe even more, 120, because sometimes, you know, it takes a while to put on MFA. But we're going to sit down with our risk manager and your insurance agent and the client, right? And we're going to say, okay, we see you guys as a potential, you know, based on loss history, right? $3 to $5 million loss in the event of a ransomware event. You know, you have $1 million or $500,000 of coverage. We would suggest that you would increase coverage and create that. I mean, MSPs can be proactive, talking and requiring their clients to have cyber insurance, just like a bank requires a new business loan to have general liability insurance. And that's a whole other conversation. I mean, I've really upset some banks recently, you know, asking them like, guys, like, when's the last time grandma falling and breaking her hip has shut down a business? It doesn't happen, but y'all are demanding that people have general liability insurance. Why would you not demand that new business loans have cyber liability insurance? Right. So MSPs can mature and make sure that they have a more proactive conversation about the insurance plans of their clients. And between that and the MSA, it should transfer some of that risk back down to them.
All right. So let's pump the brakes here for a second. I know Jesse, you've been pretty quiet. I can see the gears. I can see the gears spinning. We're coming up near the last 6-minute mark. I want to give Jesse an opportunity to I see the gears spinning. I know he's got questions.
No, this has been a great session, and I really appreciate you both coming on because I got to ask some questions that are helpful to me. And so I'll take a free hour of consulting on live stream.
Jesse, why don't you go first? I've learned a bunch of things, so
yeah,
we're kind of closing out here. So I've learned some great things, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask one last question. I put 3 in my little post about what we're going to try and answer today, and so we might not have enough time for that. But is there discounts for good controls in cyber insurance, or should that not be the focus? So I'll let Andy go with that first.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah.
Discounts for good controls.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
we all want the Geico button.
Yeah, right, sure. No, and I mean, here's the short answer. If you don't have MFA on in 2023, you're going to pay the piper. Period. End of story. Right? I mean, that's the primary control right now for a small to medium sized business. If that checkbox is a no, and your agent doesn't know how to explain that no to the carrier, and they just see you as not having MFA on, I've seen a hospital go from $90K in premium at a no to $56K in premium with a yes, right? So, and the MFA install was like $15,000. So there are cases as you increase in revenue where the install of certain controls will more than pay for itself. And MFA is kind of leading the way at the moment.
Gotcha. And then for Joe, on top of that, has been a big thing that I've preached for probably 5+ years to clients filling out cyber insurance and vendor questionnaires is never leave it at a no or a yes. I know it's a pain in the butt to fill out detail, but tell them why you're answering yes, and tell them here's the controls we're using and why we believe this is a yes. Because like you said, sometimes I read those questions and I'm like, I think this is what they're asking, but they don't really know what they're talking about. So the question to Joe is then, how much protection, or how far does that go in providing more legal protection for the client in terms of a claim if you've explained the control and maybe it was a partial yes, but you explained it?
Oh, so if it's a partial yes, right? So MFA for email access, since we're on the topic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's a 99% yes, except for the 85-year-old bookkeeper that just can't do it for whatever reason, which always seems to pop up, then you're fully so you're fully disclosing, right?
Yeah,
so that is amazing protection. But we have to think that like Travelers versus ICS case, I have a video about that on my channel, right? That's more man bites dog, right? Where it's really going, and that was terrible publicity for Travelers Insurance, right? That spooked a whole bunch of people left. And it was a stupid questionnaire to begin with, but it's really not only is just, hey, make sure you have the right stuff in the insurance policy to begin with, but also there are a bunch of exclusions coming down the pike that are, I'll say, double-edged swords. So I don't want MSPs to just think like the world is falling, it's all doom and gloom.
Right.
I have a ebook I wrote for Delinea, the PAM provider. I've got a video on my YouTube channel called The Good Days Are Gone. But things like legacy hardware, software exclusions, critical vulnerability exclusions, right? These are phenomenal opportunities for MSPs to flex their expertise, right? And to say to the business owner, hey, just so you know, there's generally no legal requirement that the insurance guy read or understand what he's selling you, right? So you either already have these on your policy or you're going to have them on your policy in the near future. It's just where the cyber market's going, right? Let's work on a plan to get you there. So I think that, I mean, there's not like discounts by the definition of the word, but I am a huge proponent of it. I tell all my clients in the cyber world, you only want to talk to me once a year when I'm taking your money. That's a good year, right? And then maybe you hear my voice on YouTube. If we're talking twice in a year,
final
you're having a
60
bad
seconds
day.
here. Yeah,
so we're wrapping up.
Yeah,
we could probably do a whole nother session again.
Probably. I'd love to do another hour, but
you get 5 seconds or less for your takeaway, Joe.
Oh, just watch my YouTube channel. I got plenty of stuff on there. Defense in depth. Go for it.
All right, Andy.
MSPs, if you're not working with the cyber specialist today, you need to start tomorrow.
Jesse.
Make sure you have a updated and customized MSA with addendums and protections. And second, make sure you communicate the why for the yes and no's on your cyber insurance applications and your security questionnaires.
Tim.
Awesome. So I'm going to bother Andy on sizing because I really want to get into that again. And Joe, like you said, this MS. Can we get a template here or what? He seemed like he got the perfect one. I know that's against the rules. So, Tim, what's up next week?
I have no idea.
John Harden.
Oh, yeah. So SAS, Avik, SAS.
SAS Leo.
Yeah, I'm still screwing it up. Sorry, John. It's SAS Leo to me. It's always going to be, but it's Avik, SAS Management, or SAS. Yeah, Shadow IT. Shadow IT. Shadow IT. I didn't get to give my takeaway. Damn you.
Go ahead. Your takeaway.
Do it.
5 seconds. I'm going to hit the end button.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
MFA that thing, would you? Just.
Awesome.
All right. So,
thanks, guys.
Joe, Andy, thank you so much. This is great. We'll have you back again because I feel like we can probably dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Hopefully, it'll actually show up on TEAMTIM this time. And yeah,
I fixed it like 18 minutes in, but yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, growing pains. Thanks, everybody. Hey,
Long weekend.
It's a holiday weekend.
Ooh.
Make sure you don't leave your computer too far away and check shit on Sunday and Monday.
Bad actors.
Ransomware incoming.
I was about to say, bad actors love the holiday, right?
They do.
I work 7 days a week, so I'm good.
There you go.
See you guys. Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody. Enjoy the holiday weekend. May this weekend bear fruits of your labor, and have a good day.
Thanks again.
Cool.